Hey, Power Athlete Nation. Welcome to another episode of Power Athlete Radio.
The premier podcast.
I'm not saying it. No.
We are the premier podcast.
Well, I know we're the premier podcast, but we're also much more than that. We are name takers, face melters, and providers of some of the best information on the planet. Power Athlete Radio.
And some would call us rock stars.
We have definite reviews in the archives that specifically call us rock stars.
Not only on iTunes reviews, but also previous seminar reviews delivered to HQ.
Well, if you do like Power Athlete Radio, please go to iTunes or any of the podcasting apps or programs that you use. Click, hit the reviews, punch 5 stars, and then lead us a dope review. If you include the word rockstar, we will read it on the next podcast.
That's a guarantee.
Yeah. If you leave rockstar anywhere in there with a 5-star, it's going up. We're going to give you some attribution. We're going to throw your name out there, and we're going to sing your praises for at least 10, 12 seconds.
If it is just a 5-star review and then cut and paste of the lyrics by Nickelback, is it I'm a Rockstar? Whatever the Rockstar song is, if you cut and paste their lyrics. I think it's just called
Rockstar.
Nickelback's Rockstar. We will read your review in full on the air.
I don't even know if it needs to be Nickelback's Rockstar. I just think you use the term Rockstar in the review. Kind of like Sushi left us that review for the CrossFit football seminar where he specifically called us rock stars over and over again. And what was best is he is a rock star and plays in a band. So, I mean, any guy who plays in a band, he knows a rock star when he sees one.
Oh, yes. So it is Nickelback Rockstar 2005 from the album All the Right Reasons.
Yeah, I celebrate their whole collection. I mean, who doesn't?
I know who doesn't. And we just talked about it on the podcast. The podcast that drops Friday, Ashley Van Houten of Canada.
I can't believe the muscle maven, Ashley, is not a huge Nickelback fan.
We could start that.
Well, you know what? I mean, what's weird is that she actually mailed us a bunch of Nickelback CDs that had been signed. I guess back in the day, she used to travel around like a groupie on Nickelback, and she's got a bunch of signed memorabilia that we're going to put up back there. So thanks, Muscle Maven, for all that Nickelback memorabilia.
For Muscle Maven's Nickelback story, listen to our Friday episode, 449, and she'll probably fact check.
She'll regale us with all her stories. But enough about that. Let's move on to episode 447 of Power Athlete Radio, where we are going to discuss mentors.
Yes. And I brought this up to John that January is National Mentor Month.
Isn't every month something? I mean, did we
Yes, it is.
Yeah, like we
said. It's more than one thing.
Well, I mean, we had a Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which was in September. Mm-hmm. I mean, every month it's something else.
Correct. Which this jumped out to me, I don't know, on social or something clicking through. It was like, all right, Mentor Month, cool. And I know that in...
Why was it Brett Bartholomew? I mean, this is pretty much his whole month.
Wow. Brett's Super Bowl?
The next 30 days are a Super Bowl. You kidding me? When it comes to mentors, that guy, I mean, he is trying to mentor people that don't even need to be mentored.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into today. And Gary Vee. It's his month.
Well, you got to use the word funnel a lot with Gary Vee.
Oh, I don't know.
Asserting your value in a funnel.
But needless to say, Mentor Month. And then in the old school.
You got to say it in the Zach Evanesh voice.
Speaking of mentors, old school, but the CrossFit football
seminar. Did your voice just crack like you were going through puberty?
But like Zach Evanesh's clients.
Well, look at that.
Yeah, that's a joke. But the CrossFit football seminar, how we presented and provided information was the stories and time and place, the life cycle of an athlete, of when the linear progression, of when the compensatory acceleration, and all these different key components of athleticism were presented. We provided the experience in your training career, and then the mentor, that we can call them, provided that lesson. So that's what I want to get into today and share some old school stories from your mentors, and then what they gave you, the gift of training, that then now is delivered to thousands of people via Train Heroic.
Tens of thousands of people around the world enjoy this stuff. Wow, mentors. When I think about the term mentor, I always think a lot about like a coach, somebody that takes you on the journey, or more importantly, somebody that emulates. In the Old CrossFit Football Seminar, I found, and this is so dorky, but I remember reading a quote, you walked into like Luke Summers' house and there was like live, love, laugh on the wall. Well, kind of similar to that, like people don't always remember what you say, but people remember how you made them feel. Mm-hmm. And I think I might have seen that in somebody's bathroom at like some cheesy house. So that's why, it goes with the live, laugh, love.
For
deal.
the record, Luke's is live, love, Limp Bizkit. So he made a compromise with his wife for their sign. 2 of her words, 2 of his.
Okay, I'll go with it. So like with the Old CrossFit Football Seminar, what I realized pretty early on was I could provide some really amazing information, but if I didn't have a practical story or something that had ability for me to spin a yarn and make people feel different and like remember that piece, it would just be information. So I really started lacing a lot of not only my own personal experiences, but experiences of people we trained with, and wanted to make this seminar very specific in that way. Now, it's not great to replicate that, because if I'm not there, how are you going to tell the same stories? And I know you guys did. And then eventually when the seminar grew, you guys actually started pulling your own stories in, which it was great sitting in the back and hearing like the same information delivered, disseminated with a different story that led people to the same place. As you guys know, I'm a big fan of the masterclass, and the one that I've just really, really enjoyed the most was by far Doris Giddings Goodwin, and her presentation and talking about historical figures, more importantly presidents. She's a presidential historian. And the one that I loved was her talking about Abraham Lincoln, that he had this open door policy when anybody could knock on his door at the White House and come in and talk to him. And then if people didn't come, he would go down to like the local pub tavern and stand with his back to the fire and tell people stories and jokes and just stand up and entertain for hours. And he was an engaging, storyteller. And she really marked an interesting point that was the best leaders are by far the best storytellers. Because unfortunately, people don't always remember the information. They remember the story, and they remember how you made them feel. It's kind of like I can't, remember much of what Joe Biden talks about, but I do remember his story about Corn Pop, the drug dealer, that he got up and he talked about, which made absolutely no sense. But I still remember that story. And different politicians have these kind of canned stories that they put together. And unfortunately, people don't always remember what they say, but they usually remember the story and the way the story made them feel.
And that is important. And from mentors that I've had and then been in a position to mentor many, it's not just telling them what to do, it's communicating the destination. And have you said the best way to do that is from the story. And then you've shared plenty of Zangus stories.
Yeah, George Zangus, who's the old powerlifter that trained me when I was in high school. I met George pretty early on because my older brothers lifted and played football. And he owned a supplement company, Marathon Nutrition, and they had a few stores and one up in the mall. That was actually right next to Warehouse Music, where we would go and get check out videos and stuff. So I'd always see Marathon Nutrition. And George would always come down and teach a lifting clinic for the football players. And so I kind of just knew his name. And when I was a freshman in high school and we started lifting weights, he came down and gave a clinic, and he actually wrote the programming. We did the Russian squat program, which was like the 6x2, 6x3, if anybody's ever done it, and it goes up to a 6x6 and then, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that was the program we followed, which was a pretty advanced program for a bunch of kids that hadn't lifted weights. But there was a inner circle of the kids that were training there that were older that George would assess as being, however he meets them or whatever, would invite him over to his house, and then they would go over and train at George's on Saturdays. And when I couldn't even drive. I must have been 14, 15 years old. One of the guys on my team, Tasso Papadakis, who's the brother of Petros Papadakis, if those of you guys are, listen to the sports radio out in LA, he was a year older than me. And George was the godfather to his little brother. So he invited me. He said, "Hey, do you want to come over and train at George's?" We went over there on a Saturday, and you guys have heard me tell the story. And, it was pretty interesting. We racked weights for most of the time I was there and just helped spotted people, moved plates. And then finally, like when everybody got done training, the weaker guys like me, the beginners, got to jump in there, and then we got coached. And over the course of like going every Saturday, and then it was like, you should come on Wednesday nights, and then you should come on Thursdays. And so I would go to school. I didn't have a fifth period. So what I did is I took 0 period, which means I started school at 7 a.m. And then I would go 0 through like 4, and then I would have lunch, and then I would have no fifth period, and then football was 6. So then we would leave and lift weights at lunch and fifth period. And then I would leave school and then go train at Zangus's place. So we were training, a couple hours a day. And there was just a ton of coaching. I mean, George, having been in the strength game for many, many years, had like in advertising in different magazines, had like stacks of magazines. So like we would get there and you just kind of like hang out. And if you were waiting or if something was going on, we would just pick up and read these old magazines. And like, dude, there were stacks of them. I was laughing the other day with Tom Incledon that George gave us creatine in 1992 and was like, just basically gave us a box that was unlabeled. And he's like, take a teaspoon of this and a teaspoon of this. And so I always joke I'm one of the longest continuous creatine users on the planet. But a lot of the information, especially a lot of the coaching stuff, kind of came in a really gruff way. It wasn't like George came over and said, hey, I want you to do this and this. It always came in like the face of some default or some mistake, like you missed a weight. And then it was like, hey, you did this wrong. You did this right. And, we would just kind of sit there and he would make comments like, I asked him why we deadlifted so little. And he like looked at me and was like, you treat the deadlift like a pretty girl. You ignore it. Maybe once a week you go pull it. And I just thought that was hilarious. And he believed that you build the deadlift through accessory movements, reverse hyper, rows, a ton of like upper back pulling, pull-ups, lat pull downs, upper back, mid back, a ton of shoulder work. I remember on Wednesdays, we'd go and we would train bench and shoulders, and we'd do close grips. And then we had to do 10 sets of 8 of seated dumbbell press, working up to the heaviest set possible, like not a vertical, but like click back about 2 clicks. And then it was like 100 dips, and we would do hammer curls, and we just basically train. So George didn't get home to work until like 6 or 6:30. So I would eat dinner, and then I would either catch a ride or drive over when I was a little bit older. And then occasionally on Fridays after school, we'd come home and George would call and be like, hey, do you want to go to dinner tonight? And I was like, oh yeah, because normally if George took us out to dinner, we were going to go to like Brazilian barbecue or Todai, which is a all you can eat Japanese food restaurant that's down on Carson Street, not far from where my dad's office, actually right in back of where the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu place is in Torrance. So we'd go to Todai, and man, I don't even know if I assume it's still there. Who knows if it is, but we'd either hit one of those two places and we'd eat a ton. And, George had been in the Navy and had actually been a submariner. And, that's where his, god awful coffee where, it's, the coffee's done if the spoon stands straight up. And, just would regale us with all these stories and, talk about Bill Kazmaier and, Frank Zane and this. And we was real forthright when we talked about, asked him about questions about training, about, steroids and drugs or really just supplements and everything. And, and then there was all of these, individuals that he knew that were on the covers of these magazines, like O.D. Wilson, I remember, was a huge dude. Kaz, obviously. And, there was like a supplement routine. And I remember, George talking about beef liver pills. Oh God, he'd give us these chalky wafers that were like these liver pills that tasted like liver, but powdered dry liver. Absolutely disgusting. And the funny part was, so my wife got some like a few different types of protein powders, and one of them was a pea protein. And she's like, oh, this is awful. And I like took a drink and I was like, this is nothing compared to the protein powder that George used to give us. It was in a 5-gallon tub. And he would give us this stuff, and you had to plug your nose when you were drinking it because you would retch. It tasted that bad. But we were convinced that because it was called, Mass Gainer 5000, that we were going to gain this amount of muscle as the dude on the cover. So, but he was just an interesting mentor in that he was a guy who, trained into his 60s, was still banging heavy weights, had these young kids coming over into his training group. And I think he probably enjoyed it more than we did. Just the fact that he had young kid, like, I don't mean like young kids, like some weird old man, but like a bunch of like pipe hitting, hard, heavy, high school football players. And I bet you out of the, I mean, there were kids that trained over there over many, many years, but, the majority of them went on to play some form of college football. So he was real good on like inviting certain people over, and even to the point of being a little elitist. Because I remember there were some kids that were like, well, Zangus never invited me over there. And I'm like, I don't know why. Did you ever ask? And he ended up becoming very close with not only myself, but actually my oldest brother, Rob. So after my oldest brother, Rob, graduated college, he moved home for a little bit until he got a job and moved out. And he would drive up and come and pick me up, and we would go lift weights on Saturdays. And I think he ended up doing George's insurance at some point. So
nice.
Yeah. So my older brother, so he became not only a very, very, very good family friend. And, it was a sad day when I got the call that he'd passed away. I remember it was 2011 because not long after my daughters were born, because I remember when I went to the service, it was like the first time I'd kind of been out of the house, and I went to go to his service. And one of the guys I saw was like, man, you look really tired. And I'm like, well, we just had twins about pretty recently. So I haven't really slept that much, but, it was just an interesting point. Like there was no internet. Like the fact that George would tell us about these individuals, talking about compensatory acceleration with Dr. Fred Hatfield, his buddy. He had one of the first West Side reverse hypers and talked about, hey, the West Side guys. And I actually remember when I was in college, you guys have heard me tell the story that I wanted to bench 500. My buddy had all those West Side videos, and I called the West Side number and talked to Louis Simmons about how to bench 500. And I remember when I talked to George, he used to, so George was a total night owl, and he would call me at like midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm a college kid. So of course it's like, what's up? If I'm home, I'm answering it. If not, you'll leave a message, right? And I remember telling him, hey, I talked to Louis Simmons. And he was like, what did you talk to Lou about? I was like, I'm going to bench 500. And like, he had, this, and went through this whole thing. And George made a good point where he's like, there've been a lot of strong people that didn't box squat. And there's been a lot of people that didn't, do this and board pressing and, all that conjugate shit. So I think George thought that there was too much complexity in Louis' stuff. But also was pretty forthright that it was like, nobody's ever done that program clean. And so there was an interesting point where, and I don't think George was anti-performance enhancing drugs by any means. At least he never said he was. But he also was a believer that there's a certain amount of genetic potential that individuals have. And that if you go to that last piece too early before you max out your genetic potential, you're leaving stuff on the table. So the idea of like, hey, if your genetic potential is going to grow you to 6'6" and you take a bunch of drugs when you're 6 feet and you don't grow to 6'6", like that's wasted genetic potential. So like there was kind of a interesting piece when we talked to him. He's like, to be a world-class power lifter and to compete at the highest level, like that's just part of the deal. But like, there's also a thing where like those individuals like Bill Kazmaier and those guys like O.D. Wilson and, these superheroes that we saw, like they were already really strong dudes. It wasn't like they were weak and then they somehow became strong. They were, super strong individuals who, pushed the bounds of what was possible once they had already become really strong individuals. And so when I talked to George, he kind of, or at least when we were kids, like you look at these guys and, they look like superheroes. And, like George made an interesting point to me one time. He's like, if you keep training, you are going to be, by the time you're like 20 years old, you're going to be like 300 pounds. You'll be like 6'5", 300 pounds. And he's like, like you have to ride out your genetic potential as far as you can. And you know what? And that's what he talked about for a lot of these guys, like, Bill Kazmaier and a lot of them were super strong individuals before they ventured down that road. And
how was it like taking in that information at that? Was the student ready to hear those things at that time?
I didn't know anything about that stuff. It was pretty funny. Like I remember the first time I had saw anything about like performance enhancing drugs or steroids was there was like a TV show that was like one of those like dare things where this kid is some football player and isn't good and then goes in the summer and takes these drugs and then comes back and
the program.
No, it was like a after school special that they made us watch. And then like the guy comes back and he's like all crazy and like beats up his girlfriend and stuff. And it's like it's total fucking.
So the program stole a plot from an after school special.
Yeah. So, but like, so it was kind of interesting. Like I had never even heard ever mentioned or anything. And then when I was like a junior in high school, there was like, oh, like so-and-so takes his stuff. And I'm like, and so I remember asking George, I'm like, hey, what's the, what's the deal with all this stuff? And so George was real forthright. And he's like, there's things that people take that allow them to exceed past their genetic potential. The problem is if you don't max out your genetic potential before you do that, you fucking, leave it on the table. And that was why, like the basic linear progression. I mean, the stuff that we use with Bedrock is so potent. Like I always joke, and if you get an email and you're looking for a program and you get an email back from us that's like, it's almost too powerful. It's probably, me or somebody else, but like that basic linear progression and the amount of strength that I've seen people accumulate in such a small period of time is next to amazing. And I would never want to rob anybody of that journey. Like that journey that I took, like under the barbell, like I would never have got, the feeling of like not being strong and sucking and then growing to be strong and like realizing like if you don't go lift weights for a week or two, you don't lose any weight and any strength and you just maintain it. You keep pushing, and you keep pushing. And it's, a pretty amazing thing, but I like,
well, in line and respect with that and the message that you're sharing what George said, I wrote down some mentor notes of purpose that I appreciated and I've listened to you share, but picking up in that a good mentor helps you understand that something is worth doing. Like if there is a drug shortcut to they're pushing you more towards the thing that is going to take longer. It's more of a process. So it is a good mentor that is trying to steer you away from the quick fix, the quick ripe thing, especially when it comes to weight training and potential.
As valuable as it was, there were some pretty glaring problems though. Because George came from a powerlifting background. I think we threw the wraps on way too early. So, I mean, I remember going in there and squatting and, all of a sudden, like anything over 225, we started wrapping our knees, right? Like, I mean, what was I going to squat 300 pounds that day for, a few sets? And like, I'm wrapping my knees at 225. And like, all of a sudden when I ended up jamming my knee, fucking around running, hurdles, all of a sudden when I wrapped my knee, I think it made it worse. So I think that because George had, been in, powerlifting and, wraps and belts and those single ply suits were kind of the, the sport equipment. I think we went to the wraps too early. I would have liked to have learned to have squatted without wraps because it wasn't until I got hurt and had to come back that I learned to like not depend upon the wrap and not sit into the wrap. And I think that, that was, I wouldn't say a cheat, but like that was something I think slowed progress.
Well, at that stage, I mean, I imagine that you think about this time often. When did you think, oh, wraps weren't a good idea? Or that thing we did, that was probably pretty stupid based off my future experience.
Yeah.
Like how often do you look back and judge that? Is it every few years, every 5?
It's probably every day. I mean, I think about all the dumb stuff we did. So what was funny was we would like read something in a magazine or hear about something, and then we would try to implement it, like depth jumps
on his watch.
No, so all the dumb stuff we did was not under George's watch. So everything we did at George's place was pretty controlled, pretty smart. Other than maybe we're wearing the wraps and maybe throwing on the belt a little early. And I'll tell you this: I didn't learn to squat to like excellent depth until I got a little bit older and actually got rid of the wraps. I wish I'd learned to squat deep without them. But like, you get to the wrap and all of a sudden, like the wrap balls up on the back of your knee and you hit like a depth and then you rock it back up. And it wasn't until I took the wraps off and said, you know what, fuck this. I want to like learn to squat better. And it was once I took the wraps off that I learned to squat to depth. And then when I threw them back on, it was, cause I squatted 6'10" when I was 19, with just wraps and a belt. And, yeah, I mean, so I was a pretty strong dude, but like, I think like if I had, I probably never to the point that let's say, and that was before I blew out my knee, but I probably had never squatted over 400 pounds without wraps and a belt on. So we would do like 135, 225, 315, 365, and then throw the wraps in the belt on. And then, or like maybe it was belt at 365, wraps at 400, and then like 440, 450, 500, and then we would pyramid up, and we would wrap for every set. And, not only did it take a really long time, but I think it just didn't develop, like it stagnated the development. But at the time I was more focused on what's the biggest squat I can get. And I know the wraps are going to give me 10%. And I know that the belt's going to give me 10%.
Did George speak numbers as the goals, or was it performance? Did he take an aim at connecting it back to, because he knew you were football players?
Yeah, but he was a power lifter.
Right.
So, I mean, there was this kind of idea that, what you do on the platform and you do in the powerlifting translates 100% to sport performance. And you know what, like that wasn't a fault of his, but I mean, he came from a powerlifting background and, that's the way it was done. So, I mean, it was very traditional in that way. Sumo deadlifting was cheating. I remember that one.
Is that from George?
Yeah. That's like, I remember there was like a video or a picture of a dude, like, feet practically out and basically pulling the bar like 4 inches off the ground. And, George was like, you got to be kidding me. Like that's
4 inches a lot, John.
Yeah. That's what she said. But like I think a lot of the foundation stuff, especially it's funny when I hear people gripe on like some of the programs, be like, how come we only do close grips? I'm like, because all we did, and not to say I never did a wide bench, but I never got hurt doing a close grip. We did a ton. I close gripped a hell of a lot of weight. And the only time I think I ever strained a pec or ever hurt myself was when I really widened the grip out. So in terms of like limiting injuries and chance of injuries, and also really wanted to focus on driving with the triceps, for me, it was a close grip bench press. And I remember George, one time we were doing close grips. He's like, you're a much better close gripper than you are a traditional, like more of like, maybe putting your pointer finger, your ring finger out on the rings, one thumb length off of the smooth to one thumb width off of the smooth. So we would play with the grip in that way. But I remember him being like, if you can drive that weight, that's a better translation towards football. And then that and dips. So we would do like sets and kind of superset back and forth with close grips and dips. So, I mean, there was a sport specific position in that and in the punch. But in terms of the wraps and the squat, I mean, that was just kind of old school powerlifting, real flat shoes. And was interesting was I had terrible tendonitis until I ended up rupturing or tearing my ACL. And when I came back, doing the Olympic squat, where, with a ton of like vertical displacement over the toes with Todd Rice and wearing Olympic shoes, cured all of my patellar tendonitis.
That's what I want to lead to next is then your experience with Rice. Cause we know you've got some nicknames for
the Rice Patty
for Coach Rice, but at the same time, you learned a lot. And as big of the conflicts or, that tension that exists.
I wouldn't say that I really respect Todd, and I doubt he's ever listened to this podcast, or he'll even belittle him to even come on ours one day. But I really think he had a ton of knowledge to teach us, and unfortunately, through his own misgivings, I think the way he taught was kind of a very difficult way to learn. But I think for me at that point, I did not really give a shit how you treated me. I didn't really care. You didn't have to be nice to me. I was like, just provide me the best information and get the fuck out of the way. And what I saw was that there were things that I couldn't do that once I started training with him, I could do. And all of a sudden, like looking at this holistic approach.
From the field or the weight room?
Yeah, both. Like, so when I had done the traditional powerlifting, like with George and even with Eric Cohn, who was a really good strength coach we had, but it was a real traditional kind of powerlifting kind of strength training. I didn't see the carryover on the field. Like I couldn't see like the 600-pound squat in the weight room translate onto the field. We used to sit back with a nice vertical, big vertical shin. And I just couldn't see the translation. And it wasn't until, and I was already a starter by the time Todd Rice came around. I think I was in my junior year. And but when he came in, all of a sudden the training that he had us do with, stability with isometric contractions and plyometrics and jumping and, the metabolic conditioning cycles and pull-ups and all the stuff that he implemented, all of a sudden when I got better at it, I could see translate to the field. Mm-hmm. And that was where, we talk about that splinter in the mind moment where I saw the training that I did in the weight room as a 1-to-1 on the field. And I couldn't figure out why other people weren't finding it in the same way. And I even saw that in the NFL where like I would get better, I'd get stronger, and I would be able to perform on the field. I'd watch other guys make the same gains and then not be able to do it. So there became this idea of like, what does the training look like and how do you translate it onto the field? Can you develop the speed and the athleticism and all the things that you need to be successful on the field in the weight room? You know, posture, position, challenging, full, movement through full range of motion, loaded movements. All of that kind of paradigm that we created for athleticism really stemmed from that observation. It was a really fun time growing up, when I did in the kind of the point of the 90s. And it was just, man, it was nice in that I can't imagine what it would have been like or the pressures to have like this much connectivity with social media and all the other stuff. I think it was nice that we get to live in these little bubbles and train and do that. I just wish, I wish I could go back and be like, hey man, like don't wear the wraps. And when you hurt your knee running hurdles, like take off 2 weeks, ice it, do everything you can. Like those injuries that are growing today are going to plague you for many, many years. Like, but I didn't have this foresight. I almost had this idea of like, if I miss training tomorrow, it's going to set me back 100 years.
Right. But now the beauty is you are in this position to share that knowledge, maybe not with 16-year-old John J. Welly, but 16-year-old freaking wiener kid out there.
The analogy from Colors is probably the best one where he's like, I was sitting there talking to Robert Duvall and it's Sean Penn and he says to his, hey, let me tell you a joke. And he goes, there's a couple bulls standing up on a hill and he looks down, he sees those cows and he's like, hey, Pop, like, let's run down there and bang one of those cows. And I guess the daddy bull looks at him and goes, why don't we walk down there and bang them all? So the idea of like, youth and I need to run in there and do, this, opposed from like, you got a long life in front of you. Like one day is not going to make or break your career. But unfortunately, when you're young, like nobody can tell you that stuff. It's kind of like for my kids all the time. I tell them like, if you listen, I'll give you the cheat codes. Like believe me. Like we were at basketball the other day and I watched this whole thing go down where my daughter's team was real successful last week and they smoked this team like 44-0. All of a sudden the girls show up and like one of them's wearing sunglasses and they're all high-fiving and like all like, got like smiley faces on their hands and they're all like, feeling good about themselves. And I text my wife, I'm like, they're going to get their asses kicked. And sure enough, they went up against a really good team. This one girl was like shaking it, like literally threw a head fake and like one girl went down. One girl told my daughter she's going to beat her up. Like she was all nervous and she asked me about it. And I'm like, there's, but here's the thing, like, even though I could see it coming and I told her, I'm like, hey, you better like relax a little bit, like, and understand that this is going to be serious. You're only as good as your best show or as your last showing. Like what you guys did last week, that's over. That doesn't carry over. Nobody cares about that. And so watching this thing happen and then realizing that your kids and the people that you mentor and coach in this, like you can't protect them from things. You have to let them go out and have that experience. If she just listened to me and was like, girls like last, and said what I said, and then everybody had their, head screwed on real tight and went out there, it wouldn't have had the same dramatic effect.
Yeah. And one of the next mentor notes that I got here is communicate your message that connects to a person's purpose. Now I know communicating purpose to a 9-year-old girl, very difficult. I'm in the same boat with some middle schoolers in lacrosse. What a pet peeve I do have is in working with coaches or communicating to the parents that I'm working with now. They're just trying to have this one-to-one, just teaching the kid the lesson period and getting frustrated that they're not.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that like the story of youth and like the age old cliche that youth is wasted on the young?
Oh yeah.
I mean, if you go back and you read stories of like ancient Greek and like all of these stories, like there's always this youth and hubris and like mistake and folly. I mean, that's the that's the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Correct, and that's how I feel in the same way. In that a kid, when the student is ready, the master appears is amazing. When student is ready, the mentor appears. Like kids 9, 13, even the 16 to 19-year-old, I mean, they need a coach. They need the ball busting, the playful opportunity to provide stress and make your own stupid mistakes. But then a coach can be there to provide the lesson in there. And mentors, I feel, really step in when you're ready to hear these lessons. It's almost this stage. And it leads to my next question. Like, this could be athletics, could be business, could be life. Like when, and it could be lessons that finally sunk in through your father, or you were going to be in a position to then ask him the questions, the difficult questions. Like, at what stage did you, and even through Ed, your brother, like what stage did you feel you were ready to ask honest questions to get honest feedback, and then that you could apply it?
Man, I think you got to be ready for a lot of that stuff. And I don't know if I was, when I played, I was good and was able to play at a high level, and, was able to play at a high level, play injured at a high level. And I think film study and all that other stuff was just part of the game. And I think everybody was focused on being the best player they could. And that involved training, that involved football, that involved being able to survive everything. I think what it really comes down to is, if you are forever asking questions and analyzing yourself and like asking, and I'm not a huge fan of asking a ton of people's opinions, just because a lot of times, like if you ask an opinion, you're going to get one, and whether or not be good or not, and having people around you, that can help, guide some ideas. But at the end of the day, taking personal responsibility for the decisions that you make. I think all too often, people make a bad decision and they're like, well, I was advised poorly. How come you didn't help me in this way? And I think the job of the mentor is to not necessarily guide you, but to provide you a framework. Like, we went over and trained with George. George lifted weights with us every time we trained. He didn't coach us. We trained in a group. I mean, we were invited into George's training group. He squatted. We helped him on with his suit and would coach him, and he would coach us. And I think like that mentor idea has always been really good for me, in that I always like to train in a group. I think the coach who sits back with his arms crossed and just, makes a bunch of, definitive statements.
Punishment, fear, yes or no, do this or else. Those
aren't mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I think mentors, at least in my life, were people that led from the front and people that were, good quality individuals. I watched my dad get up every single day and bust his ass. Like I learned hard work from watching my dad and my mom. And, I think like those mentors are the ones that I've always looked for. I think a lot of times words are hollow. If you're creative, you can come up with, that's why the internet, and especially like social media, is so interesting, because to me, words have always been really hollow compared to actions. You can get up and write some amazing quotes and put out some bullshit, but like, if that's not who you are and that's not the life you've led, it's just, to me, it's empty words. But so often the interaction that we have is a picture and these different words. And for me, my mentors were individuals that I saw do something in such a way that I wanted to emulate. And then also people that worked, I think I'll give Raphael as an incredible coach and mentor. Raph trained with us all the time. He would train at like 5 a.m, and then we would come in and he would run with us. If people were fucking around, he would do some stuff that like blew people's minds. I remember we were down in Australia teaching at Daz's gym in Newcastle. And we got off the plane, went and lifted some weights. And Rolf weighing probably about 165, 170 pounds, starts back squatting. And he gets like to me 315. So it's just about double body weight on the bar. And as he does it, and he's just wearing, shorts, no t-shirt, no shoes, nothing, squats down. As he's coming up, he explodes off the ground, jumps off the ground, and goes from a bilateral to a split stance squat. Does like a lunging split step, and then splits again into a bilateral, squats down, and then jumps off the ground and does it again, and did this little set. And here's a dude basically jumping off the ground from a bilateral position into a lunge with 315 on his back weighing double body weight. Like, it was pretty impressive, to say the least. And like, that's the type of stuff that I would see and been like, all right, like that's the mentoring. That's this, like the old fat, offensive line coach screaming at you about running while you're standing out there dying, not training. To me, that was just the coach. That was the individual. That was the ringleader, let's say. But like the true mentor is the person that's in the fight with you. And
Yeah.
I think that was how I always kind of disseminated it. And like, it's real easy to, and it's really funny too. Like on the internet, there's become this huge like life coaching thing where now I'm in this life coaching thing and this guy's going to teach me this and this. And it's like, make sure that guy shits all in one sock. Like, who are you to give other people advice unless your life is in order? And it's like with the training stuff. I mean, shit, man, like all the programs, everything we've done, like we bust ass and we train, but like that's important and people see that stuff. It's not disingenuous. And so, I mean, it's, I think authenticity is the thing that's hardest to fake, and it's the hardest thing to replicate.
Yeah, that's another note here. A mentor, they should provide you very specific, this is your role. And that's what I took away. Fortunately, I was able to go down and experience the Ruiz firsthand. But it was, and I told him straight up, like, I'm here selfishly. I'm going to take from you. But he established, okay, then this is your role. But here's what I'm asking you to do. But here's how it will add value to your life. It was very, very clear about that. Then the next 4 months, punishment was severe, but at the same time, he was right there alongside you, swimming.
Well, Ralph will never ask
coaching.
he will never ask anybody to do something that he will not do himself. But because he's doing it, he expects an extremely high standard.
Yes.
I remember one time there was like a kid clinic or something that Ralph had, and they were bringing all these kids in, and Ralph's like, "Hey, would you mind jumping in and coaching?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll help. I mean, shit, I'll hang around and just help you out." And it was pretty funny because I hadn't like really ever been a coach, and I really like didn't understand what it was all about. And it was pretty funny because these kids like sensed the fact that I wasn't much of a taskmaster in that way, and like started fucking around. And Ralph came over and lowered the boom on these kids and kind of scolded me. And he's like, "You know what? Like, you have to set the precedent early on. Like, it doesn't matter. I know you do it on the field, but you got to do it in everything. And you know what? You have to demand respect. And if you feel like people aren't giving it to you, you need to call them out and go, put them on blast." And I thought Ralph, in terms of anything, like Ralph was not only in my book an excellent mentor because it wasn't just hollow words. I think all too often, man, we get stuck in this hollow words thing where it's just easier to sit back and eat a bowl ice cream and write some inspirational bullshit. But at the end of the day, like who's in the fight, like the man in the arena, right? I mean, we've talked about. So I think for me, the mentors and the people that I've been around that I've always respected and emulated and helped me were people that were the men in the arena. I'm not interested in the crowd or the critic.
Yeah. And if you're seeking this mentor, like, you have to understand they're giving you time, energy, freaking love. For a lot of them, they're giving you so much, and it's important that you are taking from them, but communicating how you will use that information in the future. So being a mentee nowadays in the inauthentic
is that even a word, mentee?
I believe so. Okay.
Well, it is now.
Inauthentic world of the internet, like, very unappreciative. They do exist that don't value your lessons. And I guess as a giver, you have to be in a position, if the information, the energy is not matched, be ready to walk.
We've seen that for years, man. Like, like there's people that reach out to us every day that aren't ready for what we're doing. And, hey, I'm trying to make an excuse or this. And it's like, most people just, put the credit card down, join a program, get in it, and just literally fight it out every day. And then there's other people that dance around it. And I think with like the mentorship, I mean, we've really had a pretty amazing thing. Like, I don't want to say that the internet and everything we've done has been some, terrible experiment, but for the most part, I think the fact that we've been able to record a podcast like this and push it out on all these different channels is an amazing opportunity to influence people. I think we've never been in a point in history where we can influence as many people as quickly as we are. So I think that's a really powerful deal, but it's also an incredible responsibility. And, the other interesting thing is not every person has your best interest at heart. And that's something I think about constantly. For like when you do mentor somebody, or helping somebody, or you're doing this, or you're bringing somebody on, like, are you acting in their best interest, and are they acting in your best interest or the best interest of the endeavor that you're doing? Like, if we bring somebody on here, a power athlete, at the end of the day, their job is to do the job we need them to, for power athlete, and, nurturing my inner child and making sure that that's secondary. Like, they need to do this task that's required. And I think taking a team approach, like in pro football, man, like if my job was to play left guard or right tackle, whatever it was, I had to do my job so that the other people could do their jobs. If I didn't do my job, other people can't do theirs. And I think that there's, a lot of times I think people are always looking for mentors. And sometimes, like Tony Blauer, be your own bodyguard. Sometimes you got to mentor yourself. And, we had that discussion about self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Like there's definitely like a self-mentoring where you're like, you know what, this is where we're going to go. This is the information I'm going to implement. And I'm not going to stop until I hit what I'm looking for. Yeah.
In actually Robert Greene's Mastery book, highly recommended, but he does talk about that at one point, because mentorship is certainly a part of mastery of your skill,
sure.
Craftsman, trade.
You have to apprentice.
Apprenticeship. But he says apprentice yourself.
Yeah.
If you can't have this. And there's plenty of self-taught skills and individuals out there. But at the same time, if you are seeking a mentor, you aim to provide value first for them. What are you going to continue their legacy, apply their information, challenge, and lead them to different conclusions? So provide value first if you are seeking a mentor. I know it's difficult as a 16-year-old kid down the road from a old power lifter, but you gave him youth, you gave him energy, it sounds like.
Yeah. No, I mean, we were good friends. And, what's funny was, after I had the kids, I started going to bed real early because I was super tired. And George would leave me these messages at like midnight, 1 a.m. and I'm not up. And they would just go, I'm going to turn my phone off. And so he left me these string of messages, and I usually get up in the morning and call him, but he was a night owl. He didn't wake up till later. So we kind of had this epic game of phone tag going. And, and then it was interesting. And then when I got the phone call, like I was planning on calling him back. I kept missing him and leaving messages and this and this. And then I the next call I get was that he'd passed away. And I was like, man, like, just like everything, like, like what you wouldn't pay for one more day to hang with my dad and talk to him and tell him everything, or one more to thank George for all the stuff that we did. So I really think that if somebody influences you and somebody mentors you and helps you, like, don't miss the opportunity to thank them and tell them how impactful they were in your life. Because unfortunately, like, life is very short, very fleeting, and very fragile. And sometimes it just gets smoked away. And like, like my dad got sick, or found out he was sick right around Christmas, and was gone February 28th. So it'll be 3 years. And like, as much as I got to say to him, it wasn't enough. The opportunities we got to hang out and have great conversations, what I wouldn't pay for just one more day. So my advice is, search out a mentor that helps you, expands your horizons. I look for authenticity. And then at the end of the day, value them and thank them and let them know how impactful it was for you. And I would hate for, somebody to move on or move away, or, something to happen and have that person not know the value. Cool.
Boom.
Awesome.
Preach.
Well, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. I'm John. This is Tex. And here we are, just melting faces, breaking hearts, and expanding minds.
If you're looking for training, guidance, and mentorship, powerathletehq.com/training. If you're looking for education to learn how to lift, or to empower you to teach others how to lift, academy.powerathletehq.com. We also have nutrition, guiding, and mentorship in that respect. Anything you need to empower your performance and prolong your health. Cool. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks.
Now it's time for you to empower your performance. Head to powerathletehq.com/training to choose from a number of programs to meet your specific performance goals. And if you like to break a mental sweat too, visit academy.powerathletehq.com and become a real stakeholder in you or your athlete's success. Until next time, bye!